Uinta Basin special events coverage on VTV6 and Strata Web View is made possible by Century 21 Parker Real Estate Professionals, Brian Gorham State Farm Insurance, Uinta Basin Healthcare, and Wind River Wireless.
We are happy to welcome all of you here tonight, and we hope a few more will join us later on. It's a busy time, but we have the opportunity to hear from Shar Benson tonight about her history of Roosevelt. And she's published a little history here and about her memories and so forth. And I think maybe to introduce her, I'll just start out reading her little history and her background, and then we'll turn the time over to her. And we'd like to have you chip in if you have some memories or anything you'd like to talk about that relates to what she's saying, so we can have a little discussion as well. This is Shar's history. I was born in Roosevelt, Utah, in a little yellow and white house at 195 North, 300 West on June 8th, 1934. The name I was given is Charlene Larson. My parents were Cyrus Brigham, Cy, and Anna Mary Hancock Larson. The area was called Idiot Flat. I always said that was my problem. I was born in Idiot Flat. The Richmonds across the street were our neighbors, Ed and Sandy. Both grandparents were early pioneers of Roosevelt. E.T. Hancock and his family came to Roosevelt in 1905, and Cece Larson and his family coming in 1907. I married Gordon Benson from Roosevelt in 1952. We have 3 girls, Terry Lynn, Lorianne, and Michelle. We have been married 61 years. I worked for Mountain Bell for 20 years. From 1955 to 1967, I was a manual switchboard operator. The operators were in the dispatch for fires, police, and all emergencies. After Roosevelt went to dial telephones in 1967, I worked in the business office collecting bills and selling telephones until 1980, when the Roosevelt office was closed. I was Justice of the Peace in Uinta County, the West Side Precinct, for 7 years. During the time I was Justice of the Peace, I married 115 couples. I started selling real estate in 1987 and opened my own brokerage in 1998. For 10 years after I began selling real estate, I was a bail bonds person. The Lynn in my name seemed to fade away. Shar was easier to use in advertising. Thus, my real estate brokerage became Shar's Realty. There are 5 generations of entrepreneurs from Cece and Cy Larson family in Roosevelt, beginning with Cece Larson, the general merchandise store. Cece's son, Cy Larson, had the Roosevelt flour mill. Cy's daughter, Shar's Realty. Shar's daughter, Terry, Sweet Gatherings. Terry's son, Mike, and his wife, Cassie, Ruffles and Rust, a clothing store. Terry's husband, Gary Rohrer, owns and operates RBS Fishing Tools. Lori's husband, John Team, has Northeastern Office Supply. Cece's family all left the basin except Cy and Claire. Claire owned and operated a pot bottling company just west of Cece's store. Claire had 2 sons, Dale and Ford. Dale was a dentist until he retired about 10 years ago. His son Todd is now the family dentist. I'm grateful to my aunt, Louise Fisher, who made sure I had pictures and genealogy of Roosevelt and Cece Larson family before she died. This book is my contribution to the Roosevelt, Utah Centennial celebration. Charlene Benson. Without further ado, we'll present Shar. We'll let her take over from here.
Terrible when you have to tell your age and everything about you, but that's what makes it. I thought we'd just start out kind of a little conversation piece here. Dale said he had a...
Use the microphone.
You're not hearing me? I'm sorry. But Dale, would you like to come up and use the mic for about 3 minutes? Dr. Ogden is here and would like to hear what you have to say.
Oh, this is okay. Doug, last time you asked about the dentists here, and it hit me on the spur of the moment like that. I couldn't think very good, but just briefly to answer part of that question, I remember when I was just a little kid, about maybe 6 or 7 years old, and I went to a dentist that was here in town. His name was Campbell. And the corner where the bowling alley has their parking lot, right there on that corner, there used to be a motel. It was the Standard Motel. And Dr. Campbell owned it, and he had his office in one of the rooms in that motel. It was kind of funny because in the evenings he'd sit out in his little chair and shoot birds out of the trees with his BB gun. And then I don't know, I don't recall just what happened to him, but after he left, there was another dentist here, and his name was Warnick. And I never did go to him for dental work, and I just remember his name. He wasn't here very many years, and then there were 2 brothers that came here, and they were Don and Vera Johnson. And they were in the Army Reserve or something. I don't remember how long they were here, but they got called up to go on active duty when the Korean War was on. And they left, and when they left, Don Mantella came. He had got out of dental school the same year I graduated from high school. And he went to Duchesne and started there. But when the Johnson brothers left Roosevelt, there wasn't a dentist here, so he moved over here. And then he was here by himself. He was the only dentist in Roosevelt until I came in 1962. And of course, since then, there's been a lot of dentists. I can't go through all of them. But anyway, a brief history of the dentists in Utah. And by the way, that motel, the Standard Motel, Tim Rockwood's dad, his name was Cliff. He came and bought that motel when Dr. Campbell left. And of course, his daughter, or his son is Tim Rockwood, and he would be, his son, Lee Rockwood? Yeah, Lee would be his grandson, and also his daughter was married to, y'all know her, Nancy. Nancy Percival was his daughter also. That's it.
While we're on it, I have a dentist story, and I don't know if it was Dr. Warnick or Dr. Campbell, but was there a dentist that was known for kind of tipping it a little bit, having a little too much to drink? Do you know, Dale? Anyway, my husband's mother was having terrible pain, and so his dad took her to the dentist, and it was in Vernal. And the dentist sent him out for some pills. So he went out for the pills, and when he came back, all she had was a toothache. She had no top teeth. They were all gone. And when they put a stop to it and went home, but
he was in Vernal.
This happened in Vernal.
Yeah, well, I kind of remember some stories about him over in Vernal, but I can't remember his name.
But she still had her bottom teeth the rest of her life.
That kind of thing doesn't happen here.
I printed these, and we're going to talk about them just a little bit at the first. These are the 5 generations that of our family that have descended from Cece Larson. At this present time, this is my store, Char's Realty at the top, and Mike and Cassie's, the Ruffles and Russ, Carrie's, the Sweet Gatherings at the bottom. There's 2 sections. One's a 2-page. Reach up and grab some of these others. Jesse, do you want to see if you can get them? Second page is RBS Fishing Tools. Third page is John Team's Northeast Office Supply. And the bottom one is Dale Larson and Todd's dentist office. But I thought it was kind of neat that there was that many, 5 generations of businesses from Cece Larson. And then you've all looked at the pictures, and so we'll go into our little story here. Let me see if I know how to do this. There is the pictures. This house right here is where I was born, on 195 North, 100 East. 300 west, 195 north. Let me get my little flashlight out.
For those of us who's lived here all our life and don't know the addresses, where is that at?
Where the Roosevelt Second Ward is, the church where I go to church, is just 3 buildings south of that. It's the Larson trailer court. Where the VA hospital is, the VA is just west of that. Okay? That's where I was born. It was yellow and white. And these are just our businesses. So that's the family thing. And I start out telling about the Indians. And right now, the Indians are a big uprising, but other than that, we're fine. This is the first UBIC on July 11th, 1913, and the reason I remember it is Mother said my dad was over to the UBIC when Buzz was born. That's my brother, and she was pretty upset about it, so I've always remembered that date. And this is in Fort Duchesne, and they went in the military built a big circle, and the base was in the middle. This is Governor Spry, and see how the buildings are 2-story buildings? They were big houses to live in at the time. And then I tell about how Mother worked for the captains, and they mopped their floors with milk to make them shine. They hadn't heard of floor wax at the time. This is my mother's sister, Zina Hancock. She was the first queen of the UBIC.
So would have that been in the circle over there, Shar?
In the circle, yes, at that time. I don't know when it started coming to Roosevelt, but it started in Fort Duchesne at the military base. This is White Rocks, and they built the boarding schools. You know, they came here. I got in a little problem when I first wrote this because I said the Indians were wild. I'd kind of taken it from Louise's book, but some of the Indians got a little upset about it, so I rewrote the book and put Native Americans and all that. But they did not join together quickly. So the army came in, or the government came in, and first the Episcopal Church built this church, and there was about 4 buildings, and then the government came in and bought them, and they took the Indians from their houses, and they kept them year-round, except for short vacations when the Indians would come and get them, like for Christmas or something, but they cut the little girls' hair all in page boy, and they were all cut the same, so it was quick to groom them, and they did educate them. I asked one of them, I said, why did they take you to White Rocks? And they said, to educate us. And that's so, and it worked out really well. In about 1904, this is Levi Hancock. He was a polygamist, and he was the father of Ether Hancock, Samuel, Levison, and Solomon Hancock. Now, Levison settled in Altamont. These others all settled in the Hancock Cove, and that's why it's called the Hancock Cove. And you'll find most of the Hancocks and the Goodriches are related because so many of the Hancock girls married Goodriches. So that's how that happened. I meant to tell about E.T. Hancock. He was one of the first presidents of the 70s, and you'll find him in the Doctrine and Covenants in section 124, verse 138, that you will find that he was the first president of the 70s, one of the first 7 presidents.
Did you say E.T. Hancock?
No, this is Levi Hancock.
Not E.T.
No. And he was a polygamist, and these 4 sons were from his 4th wife and 2. Now this is Ether and his wife Lois Arabella Alexander. And this is their first house in the Hancock Cove. Now most of you will remember Gladys Drollinger, I don't know if you remember any of the rest, but you remember Gladys? See that little dot on the roof? That's Gladys Strollinger. That's my mother's sister. And then that house burned down and they had to build another one. This was the Hancock family. As they were growing up, there was 11 in the family, Ether and Arabella. This is my mother. And there was Lina Pike and Warda. This is as they got older. It's my mother, Warda. That's Aunt Gladys. And that's Lina Pike and Lou Hancock. I know if you know Lou Hancock, Luella Hancock, sells real estate. That's her dad. In 1919, June the 6th of 1919, Emmy Hampson, E.T. Hancock, and John Taylor went to St. Thomas to start prospecting. Now, Emmy Hampson and E.T. Hancock were the first ones in the Uinta Basin the year of 1905. So this is several years later. Yeah, St. Thomas is in Nevada. No wonder I pulled the wrong page out. That's my problem. Maybe I can go back just a little bit. The Indian Reservation was staked out, and I hate people that say when they're talking, but you have to put up with me tonight. It was never surveyed, but it was put from the top of the mountains to the north, the top of the mountains to the south, and drained into the Duchesne River in 1861. Then in 1886 was when the military base was put in Fort Duchesne. In 1902 was when the boarding schools in White Rocks were put in, and then they closed in 1950. And I'm sure you all know that the Indians were unable to purchase alcohol until around 1950. That they were always caught stealing vanilla and stealing shaving lotion and things like that in the grocery store and drinking it, usually there. The grocers would find the empty bottles there. In 1905 is when the white man came in and started drawing for his 160 acres, and Levi had came with his family to help them pick out their 160 acres. And they paid $1.25 per acre for it. And then they had to prove it up. They had to live on it and make sure, just like when you're on Greenbelt now, when you're farming your farms, you have to prove that you're using it as a farm in order to get a lower tax rate. But anyway, then in 1916 is when Emmy Hampson and E.T. Hancock first came to the basin. E.T. had 11 children and drew the northeast corner of the Hancock Cove. E.T., M.E., and John Taylor started their prospecting in 1916. And Emmy, as you go through Nutter's Ranch, if you look right up on the cliff, you will see where it says Emmy Hampson, just carved in the cliff, and we've got a picture of it here. And they prospected for 3 years, from 1916 to 1919. But they did come home during 1917 and 1918. And I wanted to read on page 4, it says, they prospected for 3 years, only returning home for a while during 1917 and 1918. This was a terrible time. Influenza came and the people were afraid to help one another because so many had died. Ether's wife, Arabella, and she was known as Belle, had 3 brothers die on the same day, and that's why I put this tombstone in here that you can read. There's 3 names all dying on the same day. And before the end of the month, another one had died, and the First World War was on, and many of the soldiers from the area were being killed. Then in 1919, they went back to St. Thomas. And this turned out to be the last trip that they went for the prospecting. on January 13th, E.T. and John Taylor went out to prospect. They were there in threes, but they would only go out in twos because one had to stay in the camp and clean the gold and prepare the meals and do this kind of thing. But these were supposed to return on the 18th when they were to be picked up and taken back to be able to come back to Roosevelt, but they didn't show up back. And so Emmy Hampson waited for the man that was going to come and get them, and then they called the posse. And when they found them, E.T.'s head was blown almost completely off from the load. They called it load instead of bullet. And Hancock's watch, no, Taylor's head was blown almost completely off. E.T. was shot in the back, the bullet going through his body, and then he was shot in the arm and the leg, and the bodies were just wrapped in canvas and buried on the waterline of Lake Mead. And he left my grandma then with 9 children that weren't married to take care of, and it went on to tell, it goes in the book to tell how she worked for Borders and mining places and the things that she did to try to take care of her 9 children in those days. And then she married Eugene Scoey, and she was married for 2 years. He worked in a turquoise mine in Colorado, and he got a little piece of turquoise in here, and a red streak started to go up his arm. And she called for the doctor, because then you called for the doctor, and the doctor came to your house. But the doctor didn't come. He was at a party. It was Dr. Whitmore at the time, and he was dead in 3 days. And then she married George Searle, who had been married to her sister Zina, but Zina had died, so they got married. George was a Uena County sheriff, and he was out to find Butch Cassidy and the Wild Bunch. And then we talk about the strip. I'm not doing too good keeping up with my C.T. Hancock, and that was Emmy Hampson's writing on the wall. This is Belle Hancock when she was left to take care of her 9 children. But this is her mother and dad. And her mother was the first white child born in Colorado on the Marmon Battalion. Her dad had died and left the mother before or right after the baby was born. And so she was the first white person to be born in Colorado. The rest were Indian people. And we talk about George going after Butch Cassidy to the strip. Let's see if we have a picture of that. Yeah, there's the strip just east and south of Gusher. And it tells that it was wilder than Deadwood, South Dakota, that it was a place for prostitutes and gambling. And the soldiers, when they first came, they were black soldiers. A lot of them were black soldiers, and they had the curly hair. And the Indians called them buffalo soldiers. And so the buffalo soldiers were rampant then. That was Mary and Ed Harmston. And they're the ones, this story is the Roosevelt history that is written. You've all read it. And it's really written cute. It's written by George Stewart, and I need to put this in here. It just tells about how Ed was a surveyor. He had surveyed all this land. And I think he probably surveyed it as a reservation, too. But they talk about the town was growing, and in 1910, there were 17 houses that could be counted in Roosevelt. Ed F. Harmston had surveyed the town, and on February 26th of 1913, in Roosevelt, a citizens' committee was held in the schoolhouse at 8 p.m. R.S. Collette was on motion of Ed Harmston, who made chairman of the meeting. George Pierce was elected secretary, and upon request, the chair secretary read the viz. Oh, that's a word they used to use, whatever it means, must be the last minutes or something. To incorporate the town of Roosevelt, Nicole made by J.H. Hardy, Paul Hanson, Ed Harmston, Owen Benyon, Axel Birch, and I remember Axel Birch with the telephone company, and R.S. Collette on behalf of the citizens. The motion of Mr. N.L. Nelson to incorporate was discussed at length and carried, with Cece Larson being the only one that opposed it. I thought that was something to it. My grandpa was the only one that opposed it. But they did, the motion carried, and they were able to incorporate Roosevelt. And later they did take it from Wasatch County to Duchesne County. Some of the things in the minutes that I thought was kind of neat in here, it says the town of Roosevelt held its meeting on April 23rd, 1913 in the Dry Gulch building. Now, the Dry Gulch building, see, I can't do two things at once. This is actually, you might say teenagers. This is Tiny Wilkins. Anybody remember Tiny Wilkins? This is my mother. This is me before they got married. This is Jasper Corn Peach, and I don't know who these others are up here. And I really don't know the year of this picture right here, but it's Roosevelt's Main Street, probably about 1907. But anyway, they decided to incorporate Roosevelt, and I thought it was rather neat the way Ed Harmston platted it all out in there's Plat A, Plat B, Plat C, and each different time they're talking about the different places. And I thought he was quite a man to be able to do all that. But in the minutes, this is in 1913, some of the little things that I picked up. I don't know whether they're funny or what, but it says, on motion of Mr. Collette and seconded by Mr. Benson, and the way they always say Mr. in their minutes, the marshal was instructed to notify the management of the Roosevelt Stud Horse Company to move their stallion Dandy from his present stand behind the Charles Wallace blacksmith shop to some point not so objectionable to the citizens. Now, I think that this blacksmith shop was right where Dale's dentist office is now. There used to be a blacksmith shop there. And then they talk about all the bills that they had to pay, and they're just little bills, like $37.07, $6.29. And then they talk about Plat C, September 27th, they talk about Plat A, and a bill of Andrew B. Roberts for $3 for work done on the pickup Dugway. And I thought, where is the pickup Dugway? Does anyone know? Well, it's in the minutes. November 10th, 1913, a meeting was held for the purpose of canvassing the returns of the town's municipal election. And so even though they had put Ed F. Harmston in as a mayor or president, whatever they called it then, they still had an election in November. And they had to pay for the canvassing and pay for the people that took care of the votes. Said Ed F. Harmston, president-elect, R.S. Collette, J. H. Hardy, W. H. Gagan, and A. Birch were trustee-elects, and these officers were declared elected for the year 1914. The bills for the judge's election were presented, and on R.S. Collette's motion were allowed as follows. William H. Doggett, $5.70 to rent for the rent of the hall. Charles Wallace and Bert Smith were allowed $3.20 each for being a judge. Meetings were held November 22nd and December 1st, 1913, for the purpose of granting a franchise to Uena Power and Light, which is now Moon Lake Electric, to erect and maintain power lines in the town of Roosevelt. So this is 1913, but I know outside the city limits, you didn't have power until like in the 1940s. Your refrigerators were ice boxes with ice in the top. And a meeting was held on December 2nd. If you guys want to say something, holler at me. Don't let me just keep looking down. A meeting of December 13th, December 2nd, 1913, appointed E.M. Swain as deputy marshal during the absence of the marshal on legal business in the courts in Heber City. That's where they had to go to record all deeds. And Salt Lake City, and also to confirm the appointment of E.M. Swain and William Levi Jolly as special peace officers to assist in the arrest of persons suspected of gambling. So gambling was a big thing in 1913. And then we have minutes of 1914, and I've just kind of condensed them, but January 2nd, the town board met for the purpose of issuing a license to the Roosevelt Banking Company. Let's see if we can find Roosevelt Banking Company. We may have to go back. There's the first Roosevelt Bank. It's on the alleyway straight across from the commercial club. You're a little late, Mr. Hullinger. We're glad to have you. A meeting was held January 7th for the purpose of approving the purchase of books for the town accountant. On February 14th, the town added Plat B to the Roosevelt City, and a $2.5 million road tax was levied. The town borrowed $125 from the banking company. A motion was made to levy 5 mills, and the motion carried. And then it goes on to say they allowed somebody to buy a book on chloride lime for sanitation purposes of the toilets and things that they were having problems with. March 4th, they paid $25 for the Deseret News. And as a petition, some citizens we're reading the town board of, was read asking the town board to have the slaughterhouse of Missouri, must be Mr. Xavier Blonde. Does anybody remember Xavier Blonde? You know Arvin Blonde, this is his dad. And S.M. Hancock to remove and the grounds to remove their slaughterhouse and the grounds to be cleaned up. And on March 22nd, they ordered street lamps for Roosevelt City. On 1914, the clerk notified the Uinta Telephone Company by letter to replace the present poles sustaining their lines. And the 22nd, the town board made a proposal to Roosevelt Realty to purchase 30 acres west of the Roosevelt's Main Street for a park at 75 cents per acre. The property is located on Lagoon Street, where Roosevelt's old park is located. And the $2,225 was to be financed by the seller at 6% interest. 6% was a high interest for that day. And there was a meeting on May 6, 1914 that added Plat D. A public meeting was held to discuss the park and the cemetery. And June 3rd, there was a meeting of the town to raise the town's clerk's salary to $40 per year. And the marshal asked for a $10 raise, which he got, but then they took it away from him again. I don't know why. But the minutes of June 5th was established to establish a grade on the streets and to regulate the posts for horses placed in the streets. Cece Larson had a platform in front of his mill. We'll have to go back to it. Anyhow, there was a platform, and it was just like a truck, where they weigh trucks. And he had to move it from over where the tax place is now, over to where the flour mill is, because they didn't want it over where his Rod Hickens' tax place is. And in 1914, there was a motion made that all citizens were to clean up their water closets, which was their outhouses. And then there was a motion made also, if you can see, to have them stop playing ball in the streets. And there wasn't any trees or anything. And it talks about John Redmond was the one who ran the commercial club, and their fire department was a bucket brigade. You hand a bucket on, and how they had a big fire there one time, and how upset the people were that the ladies were upset. They saved the commercial club.
Tell us about the commercial club recently.
The commercial club has really been a pretty good place. It's a place where the old guys like to go and play cards and play pool and all of those things, but they've always been good to donate up until they aren't a commercial club anymore. And they donated money to like the American Legion does, to send kids to school. And and they would have dinners. They'd have corn on the cob and all those good things that you could go and eat for free, and they were always helping somebody. So they didn't get all the credit that they should have done. It was mainly bad news. Okay, this is Cece Larson's family when he came to town. And in here it tells about when he first got here and they drove up over the hill and his wife got out. He got to visiting with his friends and telling everybody what a beautiful place it was, and his wife had to cook the dinner and her skirt caught on fire, and he was still talking, and finally the friends took the kids out of her arms and he rolled her in the dirt, ripped her clothes off, and she was a little embarrassed and had to get a blanket out of the trailer, and that was her introduction to the basin. She wasn't very happy with it. He built his first house, first store was right over in here. And they later made it the jail. I said he did a good job because it was the jail. Now, you wouldn't think they'd even need a jail in a town like that, but they did. And then this is his second store. And it turned out, this was the store down here, and this is the inside of it. And see all the hats they have? And that's the hats they're wearing over there when they tried to get them to stop playing ball in the streets. This is Cece Larson, my grandpa. This is Cy Larson, my dad. And this is Mary Collins, who worked for them. And this is where Rod Hicken has his store now. So we will move on. Mark Hicken. Is it? Okay. And then, after it was the Larson's home, then it was made into the Roosevelt Hotel. Gary can tell you about that. He used to stay there, I think. Didn't you, Gary? Stay there some? This is the old flour mill, and see, right there is where the scales was. These are horses and wagons on there. And then this is the mill in 76.
Is that the one that became the Buchanan? Is that the same one?
It is, same one. And here's the boys in the street. It's the guy that ran the commercial club. This is Cece Larson before he came to Roosevelt. Him and his son were sent on missions by Lorenzo Snow to Denmark, and it shows them just meeting here and shaking hands on the Danube. This was my dad's side, and this is the same man. Aunt Real married the son of the guy that wrote Come, Come Ye Saints. They used to come out here. Yeah. Anyhow, she married his boy. And this is before they moved to Roosevelt. And then as soon as they got back, my dad's mother died when he was 13. And so then he married the Broderick woman. And this is my dad and mother, and they were the first couple to be married in Roosevelt, to take out marriage vows. And that was in 1910. And then they went on to Price in June to get married in the Temple. And it's strange how they can go so fast. You know, they go there and they take a train and they go to Salt Lake. And they came back and the horses were gone, and Mother said that some guy was shooting at them, and she said, and we got out of there in a hurry. He said to get out, and we said, we got out. And so that was the story of their marriage. This is just what I threw in. It's just on my dad's farm, like in 1947. And this is when my dad died in 1956, and this is Dolores. She's married to Glenn Allred. This is my oldest sister, Cleo, who's married to Rutherford Adams. And Bud Markey, you remember him? That's Frida. That's me. And this is Buzz Larson and my mother.
So was Buzz the only brother?
Uh-huh.
That's the only
Uh-huh. And they're all dead. So this is Laraine Day, who was born in Roosevelt, Utah in 1907. And some of the films that she was in is Stella Dallas, 1937, Foreign Correspondence, 1940, The Trial of Mary Dugan, 1941, The Story of Dr. Wassel, 1944, The Locket, 1946, My Dear Secretary, 1948, The High and the Mighty, 1954, Love Boat, 1978, and Murder, She Wrote in 1986, and many others. And she died in Ivans on the 10th of November in 2007.
Where did she live, Mom?
What?
Where did she live at?
Mother always told me that she was born where Bliss and Jean Eldridge lives. Burr and Jean Eldridge. But I had them search for a title, and they said Johnson's never lived there. So I'm not sure where she was born.
I think that Jean told me that she was born across the street from her.
It could be. I just had them search that because Mother said that's where she was born.
And by the way, next month, for this little history lecture, Pat Stringham has done some research on Laraine Day, purchased all her movies and posters. She's going to tell us all about her
Oh, good.
next month, June 3rd.
Good. Could make it the 8th. That'd be my birthday. Okay. This is Dr. Whitmore. This was Mother's doctor. And this is where his hospital was. Now, this is on Lagoon Street. You know where Burr and Jean live? It's just right down by the alley. And I can remember going there and waiting for the doctor.
Mr. Huey used to go over when Dave used to live just more to the east there.
That was Bob and Reva. Dave always lived upstairs in the drugstore.
Oh, did he? So
Uh-huh.
Bob and Rita.
It was Bob and Reva that lived there.
Yeah.
Now this is Dr. Miles. Look how young she was when she started and came to this area. And this is where she lived, across from where Shirley Wilkins has her, across from Shirley's in there. Her home was here and her hospital was here. And this was, I think the hospital was started about 1947. This is the old high school, which I still have remorse because it was so pretty up on that hill. And they just tore it down, and now they have nothing but a bus garage. And this is the way that they mixed the cement for it. You know, these little hand mixers? There was no big trucks or anything. And this is where they were just tearing it down. It was about 1962 when they tore it down. Anybody know what this is? It's kind of sad. I always thought that was a good building too, but it just went down.
That's a great song when the cops shop is now.
Probably.
Starting to run so fast.
You know what this is?
Yeah, the telephone.
Josephine Jurgensen,
You bet.
LaRue, Lorette or Loris, Beth Reynolds, Colleen Weissel, I don't know who that is,
That's you.
Wanda Reynolds, and Rust. I can't think of her first name. Berth Thompson and Gladys Zimmerman, that's her nose right there, and Zola Allred. And they're all dead except those three right there.
Is that Joni Crozier's mother?
Uh-huh,
Zimmerman?
uh-huh. Do you know who this is right here?
That's scary.
Yeah, it is, it is. On Sundays, you could wear pants. And so this was a Sunday afternoon. I went in, took some pictures.
That's quite the place.
Mom told us a lot of fun stories about those, being an operator.
Well, I bet you learned a lot of
You
things
knew
about
who was messing
was
around,
happening.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
With each other, kids, you knew who was calling who.
Yeah, you didn't dare really say too much, but you felt sorry for a few guys. Anyway, and the kids would call in and say, "Operator, do you know how you spelled such and such?" And I'd say, "Do you know where my mother is?" And then we were the fire department. I was the one that got the call when, I think it was a Hanson got his arm in the corn chopper. And, you know, to try to get the highway patrol out there, you panic trying to get those things done. This is Marion's, and her first store was really in a tent over by Zion's Bank. And then she moved to this building right here, where Mike and Cassie have put a building now. Then this was Cornerways, where John Team's office is. It says 5 and Dime, you can read right there. And this is the Onyx Hotel, where it says it's modern, they have a bathroom in it. And then this is where Marion's is now, but Marion was always a hard worker, and worked till 11 o'clock every night. We're probably going a little overtime. This was cream day in Roosevelt. They used to bring their cream to, I don't know if it was Hanson's Creamery at the time, it used to be over in here. And then everybody went shopping.
Saturdays were big days.
Saturdays were big days. This is more when I can remember. I can remember this cash meat market, and I can't remember what those things are. There used to be a Nelson's Jewelry right down here, and Wardle's had a dry cleaning store.
Then there were some vacant lots right there when we were kids.
Yeah, there was. You guys are probably in trouble there. This is J.C. Penney's that burned down, and when you would go there to buy something, you know, the cashier was up here on the second floor, more or less, and they'd put their money in a little glass bottle and make it go like that, and it went up to the cashier. She gave the change and then wheeled it down to the person.
That's pretty cool.
That was J.C. Penney's in those days. Now, Frontier Grill moved to where Marion's was when the building went sideways across there where John Team is now. And then this is the next place. This is where their office is now. Anyway, that was the restaurant then. This is the Shurtleff Hotel. Anybody remember the Shurtleff Hotel? That used to be the bus stop, and it's where Zion's Bank is now. And see, this is just the west side of the street again, Roosevelt Hotel, and
Was the Roosevelt Hotel also the Onyx Hotel?
no, Onyx is down here where Marion's is. Two separate things. And the telephone company was right in there someplace. This is the other side of the street. This is where I'm at now, this Dry Gulch building. That was Stephen Ned's. See, it says Stephen Ned's Cafe and Ashton's Hardware. Okay.
Where was the post office?
Post office, there was one just beyond that, but before that, it was over by the commercial club, along with a government office that was over there.
It looked like that way Sullivan's Furniture.
Oh,
Where the new one was built.
I don't remember that. But this is the Leslie Ashton. This was a pretty big store for Roosevelt. And it got much bigger than this. But this is where you parked with your horse. tied your horse to the rail. This is where the Onyx Hotel was. This is where Marion's was. See the old cars, the year that they were? And there it says hotel. And it says modern hotel, which means there was a bathroom. Wasn't for everybody, but there was a bathroom. And then this is the drugs, Jewish drug. And see that siren right there? That rang at 6 o'clock every night, and that's when they closed their doors. And when World War II was over, it rang and rang and rang and rang. In Jerusalem, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they bring all their gates down to close their store. Okay, I just ran onto this, but this is the first Roosevelt church house.
I think it was dedicated in 1920.
I don't know, this is all I just ran across this, and I really don't know.
I'm pretty sure it's when we celebrated the
Well, this is before it was remodeled. I neglected telling more about my mother and dad. This little cupboard my dad made for me when I was about 5. And it was painted a dark forest green. And that's because everybody was broke then, and the government furnished this green paint to paint their shovels and everything, so you could tell they were government. But everybody had a can of green paint, and everything was painted green. And he made this for me for Christmas, and it was painted dark green. And this is just a picture. This is Louise Fisher. She's my dad's half-sister, Dale's dad's full sister. And this is Dale, and this is Terry, and this is me, and this is Buzz. This is Louise's daughter and her son.
The Fisher, is she a Fisher from like the ones up in Mount
They lived in Ogden. And I was just really grateful to her for getting me all of these pictures and things that before she died, it seemed like something she had to do, is get me these things. This was just the gate to the Ouray Indian Reservation, which I just found. So I thought that was kind of neat. And then I threw this in because I don't know what year it was, but this is my brother Buzz, and this is my mother, and Cleo, and Frida, and Dolores. Must have been, 1920 or something like that. Oh, Fred Brown was in my room at school. You know, we were classmates growing up, and I had this picture, so I just threw it in because I thought, yeah, that's Fred Brown when he was young, so I threw it in, and this is a real estate company in Duchesne. There was a Roosevelt Realty, but I don't know much about it. But I thought, look at the way the guys they're standing there. They must really be busy. But they always said that the reason people came here is because they said there was 5 rivers that came, and this was a green and luscious place. And when they got here, it wasn't green and luscious. It was...
It's the Green River, huh?
There is a lot more, but we've been over an hour. And, there is one little thing that I did want to tell you. I'll just take a second. When my things got bad here and the war was on, and my dad moved us, it was just Dolores and I, to Oakland, California, where he worked at Muir Island on making ships for the World War II. And we lived in the top floor of a 3rd-story house. And I can remember, I was probably the 1st or 2nd grade in there, but you would hear the sirens ring at night, and you would look out the window, and everybody had to turn their lights off. Now, how they got the cars under control and things, I don't know. but they had to turn their lights off, and if anybody was seen with a light on in a house, you could watch the policeman go around and knock on the door, and they gave them some kind of a ticket. But it was rather scary, and then the floodlights had come on and looked for the Japanese planes in the sky. It was rather scary for a little girl to sit and think we might get bombed any time. Oh, and another thing about my dad that I wrote in here, of one of his tragedies is when we came back from California, he bought a truck, which seems like an awfully big truck to me at that time. But he had a grandson, Buzz's boy, that was named after him, as Boyd Cyrus. And he loved the little boy, and the little boy loved him. But he stopped at Buzz's for dinner one day and then looked to see where the little boy was and thought he was out of the road. And anyway, it ran over him and killed him. And my dad was never the same afterwards. He was just like he went straight downhill and died. And so basically that's all I can tell you. There's a lot more. I got those books copied today, and they weren't previewed. If you want one, they're $3.50. That's just what it cost me. And some of you already have them, so that's my story, and I'll turn the time over to Corrine.
Uinta Basin special events coverage on VTV6 and Strata WebView is made possible by Century 21 Arca Real Estate Professionals, Brian Gorham State Farm Insurance, Uinta Basin Healthcare, and Wind River Wireless.